Hello, everyone. I have with me today a very special guest, Stefania Maurizi. She is an Italian journalist. She's an investigative journalist. She's worked for La Repubblica, for L'Espresso. She's worked with WikiLeaks, with Snowden. She has extensive knowledge on the Assange hearing, which just took place. So I'm really, really happy to bring her on and have her here. Hi, Stefania. How are you doing?
Hi, Richard. Thank you. Just to clarify, I was working for La Repubblica and for L'Espresso. I left La Repubblica to join the Italian daily Il Fatto Quotidiano, and that's all. I mean,
Your record, your CV speaks for itself. Really, it's quite impressive. You have so much insider knowledge and firsthand experience with everything. I have so many questions, honestly. Could we just maybe start chronologically, just so the viewers have more insight as to the wonderful things that you did? So I know this because I followed your work. I also heard your witness statement in the hearing. You worked with WikiLeaks a long time ago, right at the beginning, on all things related to Italy. So could you give us some more insight about how they contacted you, how this all started, and your journey with WikiLeaks?
Sure, of course. So first of all, I work on the WikiLeaks documents as a media partner for my newspaper. This is really important because whenever I hear you have worked with WikiLeaks. Actually, I have worked as a media partner on the WikiLeaks documents for my newspaper from the very beginning, since 2009. Basically, everything started back in 2008 when one of my sources suddenly stopped talking to me because she was convinced we were under illegal interception. And since I'm a mathematician, for me it was natural to look at cryptography as a tool to protect my sources. So it was one of my sources inside the field of cryptography, who basically told me, you should have a look on that bunch of lunatics, which was basically a nice way to refer to WikiLeaks, because my source in the cryptography field basically was thinking highly about their work. You have to realize that back in 2008, WikiLeaks had been established just 2 years before, and it was basically the only media organization in the world using cryptography systematically to protect sources. No media organization was using cryptography to protect sources at that time, and it would take years before The Guardian or the New York Times and big newsroom would adopt cryptography. So back in 2008, started looking at WikiLeaks. I started basically contacting WikiLeaks, and I was really impressed, Richard. I was really impressed because for 2 reasons, actually. First of all, because they had published documents, really important documents, even at that time when very few knew WikiLeaks. They had published the Guantanamo Standard Operating Procedure, which was a document of which even the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, tried to obtain using freedom of information, but they were unable to access that document. And WikiLeaks obtained that document. So it was really, for me, it was really impressive because ACLU had failed and other major newspaper had failed. WikiLeaks basically had been able to get that document, but it was not just that impressed me. It was also the fact that basically, as soon as they published the Guantanamo Standard Operating Procedure, the Pentagon immediately asked them to remove the documents from their website. And they said no. And I was impressed. You have to realize that in those days, all media around the world were basically willing to say yes to the Pentagon, to the intelligence services, due to the fact that there was this terrorism alert. So everyone was very obedient and very, very there was no criticism, no critical approach to the request by the Pentagon, by
Right.
the intelligence services. So I was impressed, and they said, "Look, this is what I like this media organization approach, and I absolutely want to look at their work, want to establish a contact with them, because this is what we need. We need a media which basically has the courage to say no to the Pentagon when where everyone is saying yes, when everyone is basically doing, we had seen the Washington Post not publishing the names of the European countries where the CIA black sites were based. And we had seen basically the New York Times, which was not willing to publish very important information, and was calling torture, the CIA tortures. The New York Times were using enhanced interrogation, and they kept using this unbelievable,
enhanced interrogation.
Exactly, enhanced interrogation, and they kept using it for 14 years. So for 13 years, because they changed their policies in 2014. So from 2001 to 2014, they basically use enhanced interrogation, which is basically unbelievable, because these people were basically leaving people dying due to extreme temperatures in Afghanistan, were doing horrific things. So there was no doubt whatsoever that was torture. I mean, even some hawks, very well-known hawks, were trying to say, look, basically waterboarding is torture. And when the Japanese war criminals were used waterboarding on American troops, we basically had no doubts that waterboarding was torture. So why to call enhanced interrogation? So back in 2008, I was really impressed by this media organization, both because it was using encryption systematically, and also because he had the courage to say no to the Pentagon and to publish these kind of very sensitive documents, which made the US national security complex really unhappy. And so I contacted them. I established the first contact. And back in 2009, when they had a document about Italy, and it was a document about the alleged role of the Italian intelligence services on the garbage crisis in Naples, they called me in the middle of the night. I still remember that call in the middle of the night. And they said, we are WikiLeaks. And I could barely understand what was going on because I was sleeping. So it was, it was the middle of the night. So they said, you have an hour to rush to your computer and to download this file.
Oh,
and
boy.
Because after we will remove the file, because we don't want that other people might intercept it and download it.
Yeah.
So you have an hour. I would like to hear from you whether to have some help in verifying this document and to basically understand the context, the Italian context about this alleged scandal. And so I started working. I immediately rushed to my computer, even if I was sleeping, basically. I downloaded the file, and basically that was the first time I worked on a document for by WikiLeaks. And it was basically end of July 2009, and we published the 6th of August 2009. And since then, I never stopped working on these documents. And you have to realize, Richard, that it's a very heavy work, because you have these files. Most of the time, these documents are secrets. So you cannot go around asking people, can you help me with this CIA secret documents? You cannot go around. So it's very, very difficult. You have to develop your own network of trusted people who you can ask for any. So it's very proper, serious journalistic work, which I have done since 2009, and I'm still doing. And I think it's really important because, first of all, it's proper journalistic work. You have to verify the documents.
Right.
So you have to put your faith. And if you get it wrong, your reputation as a journalist, as a professional, is gone. And as a journalist, that reputation is something which is very hard to gain, to obtain, but it's very easy to destroy. So it's very tough work, journalistically speaking. So it is completely false that WikiLeaks just dump stuff on the internet. That's not true. They do their own verification processes, and the media partners do their own verification process. So it is a parallel. We do this kind of work in parallel, and it's proper journalistic work, very hard journalistic work.
It is. Speaking of this allegation that we heard a lot in the hearing, that WikiLeaks allegedly was very callous and just dumped these files, and I mean, we all know this is absurd, and they're just trying to paint the organization and Assange as being reckless and having quote unquote endangered sources. So could you speak more about the redaction process? Because, I mean, I know you already did in your witness statement, which was really eloquent and got straight to the point. But, just so people understand, the prosecution, they tried to make a big issue out of this. And you, having worked directly on these cables, having worked directly with WikiLeaks, you have firsthand knowledge and experience with this redaction process.
So first of all, you have to realize that before the redaction process, there was a very difficult and very, for some media partners, annoying process, which was dealing with these archives of documents and keeping them safe. So we were requested by WikiLeaks to manage these documents very carefully. So we were not supposed to discuss them on the phone, on the emails. So we had to talk to our editors. We were supposed to meet in person wherever the editors were, which was really complicated in most of the cases. And we were not supposed to use normal computers. We were supposed to use encrypted computers, and we were supposed to use air-gapped computers. We were requested not to leave our computers unattended, and I did all these things, and it was very heavy. Even this procedure was very heavy. It was so heavy, Richard, that at a certain point, I even considered to buy a special recipient for classified top secret documents, so that I could be able not to be concerned about leaving my computers unattended. And right. I'm not sure if you know that basically these top secret recipient for top secret materials are very expensive, around 8,000, 10,000 euros. So it was so heavy to deal with these rules to keep these documents safe, that many partners were annoyed. Many partners didn't want to deal with encryption. Many partners were annoyed because they were irritated because Julian and WikiLeaks was asking never to use unencrypted computers, never to use unsecure communication channels, and so on. So it is completely false that WikiLeaks was dealing with these documents in a reckless way. Quite the opposite. It was the first time, believe me. I mean, I have 19 years experience in journalism, 14 in investigative journalism, and it was the first time that we were required to work with such strict rules, using encryption all the time, never discuss on the phone, never discuss on the email. So it was the very first time. Even my colleagues working on very complicated and sensitive investigation on mafia never used this kind of very careful procedure, and they never use encryption and never use secure communication like the one I have used for the WikiLeaks files.
Right.
So it was realized quite the opposite. It was completely the opposite of what we are taught, that they were just disseminating these documents without any care, in a reckless way. It was completely the opposite. And when working on the files, like on the cables, we were supposed to read the cables and to understand what it needed to be redacted. It was Julian was very clear from the beginning. He didn't want things redacted for embarrassment. So, for example, if a politician was, for example, was dealing with U.S. pressures about, for example, the pressures on the Italian politicians not to forward the arrest warrant for the CIA agents involved in the extraordinary rendition of Abu Omar. So Julian and WikiLeaks were asking, redaction should be done by you. That's your judgment, what you think needed to be redacted. You have the expertise. We just ask you that you redact what is necessary for security reasons. So you are not supposed to redact what is embarrassing, but what is really of concern in terms of security. So we were dealing with these documents in that safe environment, which I described you, encrypted computers, gapped computers never left unattended, and so on. And we were redacting, passing them every name we were redacting. And, they were available around the clock. I mean, I found myself calling them, reaching them via encrypted channels, basically in the middle of the night, in order to be able to publish based on my deadline. So they were very, very, very efficient, because you have to realize it's a small media organization. So it's amazing that they were able to deal with dozens of media partners, passing them these redactions all the time, and not using the phone, not using the emails. It was pretty amazing. So it's really, for me, it's really upsetting to hear that we basically manage these cables in a reckless way, and that WikiLeaks just dump stuff on the internet is completely false. I mean, it's a completely false narrative.
Yeah, exactly. It's really a fabrication of the highest order. And I mean, right now, and also when we heard your witness statement in the hearing, you described a very formidable operational security procedure. And you also described how you were given USB stick, but only the encryption key afterwards when you got home, if I recall correctly.
Absolutely. So it was they were always putting many layers of security just in case one layer failed. So they gave me access to these cables. Initially, they gave me access to the Italian cables and cables about the Vatican. Something like 4,189 cables about Italy and the Vatican. And they put all these cables in an encrypted USB stick. And as soon as I arrived to Italy, in Rome, they provided me the password to the encrypted cables. And the password was very complex. It was not the password which was published by the Guardian journalist. It was a much more complex password. You have to realize that some of the journalists who work on these documents were even annoyed because these passwords were so complicated, so many characters and difficult to write the password. So It was basically very well planned. It was amazing that they able to do this, and you have to realize that they would have never have read the cables unredacted if the Guardian journalists had not published the password. And this was confirmed to me even by a prominent expert, Bruce Schneier, who told me without the password, he told me they made mistakes. Both sides made mistakes, but if I were to assess the blame, the Guardian made the worst mistake, because without the password, no one would have been able to open that file, basically. And you have to realize that basically we had worked almost a year on those cables, doing those complex procedures in order to redact the cables. So it was never ever about publishing a redacted cable.
Exactly.
And
it's so striking how, I know from you, we heard from Goetz as well, from Der Spiegel, and so many others, and Sloboda from Iraq Body Count, how there was such an exhaustive process. And as you just said, it took over a year. And then all of a sudden the court is saying, the prosecution is saying in court that these files were just recklessly dumped. I don't know how anyone can believe this. It's quite astonishing.
It's astonishing. It's astonishing even. And I believe that, but the damage is done, because they have, when you keep repeating these lies all the time, people at the end get confused, and no one knows what is true, what is false. And it's like with the fact that the U.S. authorities claim that these publications put people at risk. After 10 years, they are unable to find a single case of people who died, who was injured, who was put in prison after 10 years. But they have repeated this so many times in the last 10 years that people get confused, and they say, oh, they put people at risk. They have blood on their hands. And of course, it is not true, because after 10 years, we don't have a single example, and the US was unable to bring a single example, a single name. It would have been enough to bring a name before the court, and they didn't,
Yeah, and not to mention that, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, even if this were true, they're glossing over the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of victims of the wars, the torture, the rendition, as if they don't matter, and we have to preoccupy ourselves with these imaginary informants who don't exist. I mean, none were hurt. They can't give any examples. I want to get your thoughts on.
That's why we live in a world of propaganda. We are living in a world of propaganda where we are discussing that the victims that never were, because there was never, ever a single victim, and the US itself is unable to bring a single name of a victim of these publications, but we are never, ever discussing the thousands of people who died, were killed, tortured, were made refugees, and many of them come to Italy. So that's why we live in a world of propaganda,
Truly, absolutely. It's unbelievable. And I'd just like to get your account on your reaction when you saw that David Lee had published the password in the book. I mean, when you first heard about this, what went through your mind?
Well, I was pretty shocked, and none of us was basically discussing this publicly, because none of us wanted to basically to gain attention, to have the people realizing that the password was out. So we were, that's why I think none of us discussed these things publicly, but we were upset. I mean, I was upset in particular because I'm a mathematician, so I have basic understanding of cryptography. At that time, my knowledge was basically purely theoretical. So, but I understood the rationale behind certain choices, and I understood why Julian and WikiLeaks were asking us certain procedures. So when Julian Assange discussed these things at the very beginning with me, I remember it was the 27th of September, the first time we met after the publication of the Afghan war logs. He was flying from Stockholm to Berlin to meet me and other journalists. And basically, he arrived very late in the night in my hotel in Berlin around Alexanderplatz. And as soon as he arrived, I realized that he had no luggage apart from a shoulder bag with his a personal laptop. And he had a small plastic bag with some small bottles of soaps, a t-shirt, a toothbrush, and so on. So and he immediately said, this is all I was given at the airport, at the Berlin airport. And he said that his computer had disappeared into nothing. And I said, let's see whether they will surface, and they never surface. And those baggage contained very important computers, encrypted computers that never surfaced. And immediately after, we went to the lobby, to the hotel lobby, and immediately we started discussing password, and he explained me that you never ever publish your password. You always keep your password safe. Never disseminate any information about how you create passwords. Not only because if you make your password public, of course, they can be used by others, but also because if you provide information on how you create the passwords, your people who want to attack you will use that kind of information to devise a precise kind of attack, like dictionary attack and so on. So he addressed these problems with me at the very beginning, the 27th of September 2010, which was basically 2 months before the publication of Cables. So I suppose that he addressed these things about passwords with all media partners. I know that other colleagues as well had this information about password. Maybe I understood these instructions better than others, as I said, because I have a background in cryptography, so it's likely I understood better. But I believe if someone explains you that you should never ever publish a password, you should never ever discuss how you create password, I don't think it takes a mathematical genius to understand this, So when I saw password, I was really shocked. And as I said, no one wanted to make a fuss publicly because we thought it was counterproductive, but we were absolutely upset. And as far as I know, Richard, no other media partner ever published any password, never disseminated any information on password, as far as I know. And we were something like dozen, I think 90 media partners, or anyway, many media partners. None of us publish a single password,
Yeah, it's highly irresponsible what he did. And it's interesting that they're just going after Assange. And you also had John Young, the founder of Cryptome.org, who submitted a witness statement saying, hello, I published the unredacted cables first, and no one has told me to take them down. So I think it does speak to the political nature of the trial. And, I'd like to get your thoughts also on how quickly the day after you had this joint statement from The Guardian, from Le Monde, from Der Spiegel, saying that they were condemning WikiLeaks for publishing the unredacted cables and singling out Assange as opposed to making any mention of David Lee or of anyone else. What did you think of that joint statement?
Well, I think it was a disgrace. I think it was really unfair. And I believe they didn't know how it really happened. And I believe they are trying to distance themselves from Julian Assange, as the New York Times has done many, many times. It was very, very, bad. That's the same way with hundreds, I would say, hundreds of colleagues who never have said a single word about this persecution, this horrific situation where he's in a high security prison. He risks COVID. He risks getting extradited, spending a life in prison, and even those who really hugely basically had huge benefit from these publications, from these documents,
Indeed.
are completely silent. I think it's a scandal, because it's clear that we media partners are in a safe position compared to him and to the WikiLeaks journalists. It's pretty clear that so far no one has ever tried to question us, to arrest us, to put us in prison. So it is pretty clear that we are in a safer position. So we should use the safer position to defend him, to say, look, it's completely unfair, it's completely unacceptable that you go after him when we publish the very same documents, and we had huge benefits from it, and other people's are huge benefit, and these documents allowed to reveal tortures, allowed to reveal extremely serious human rights violation. So these documents are absolutely in the public interest. He has done with all the security requests or all the possible security conditions, and it's completely unacceptable that they are silent. I really cannot tolerate. That's why I'm really outspoken. I go around saying, look, I have worked on these documents for the last 11 years. I publish whatever he published. So, and I never have spent a single day in prison. It's completely, right. For me, it's, ethically speaking, it's unacceptable to be silent. I absolutely want to be outspoken.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, it's quite telling that a lot of these journalists published the same information and benefited a lot from these releases and worked in tandem. And then from one day to the next, they just flip on Assange, or they just spend years being silent and don't stand in solidarity when they actually benefited from this. And as you said, it's an ethical issue as well. It's not just, not just people who are involved. It's just, it concerns press freedoms, and it's grave ramifications.
Absolutely. It's both unacceptable from a professional point of view and from an ethical point of view. I mean, it's like if you are swimming on a river and you see your mate drowning and you don't do anything at all, how can you accept it? You cannot,
I wanted to ask you about, if I'm not mistaken, you were covering the beginning of the Assange hearing, and then all of a sudden the judge asked you to recuse yourself. Did I get that right? Was this because of the witness statement that you submitted on day 17, I think it was, or is it because of the Spanish case? Because I wasn't sure what you're allowed to comment on and what you can't. So, yeah.
Actually, I have access to the hearing as a journalist because of course, I'm following the case very closely. And as you know, I have been busy with the Freedom of Information Act litigation, Freedom of Information litigation. So I'm following this case very closely. And initially I was in London in February. And then when I heard that the new hearing in September would be done via video link, I asked access as a journalist. But when I submitted my witness statement as a witness of fact, basically the US lawyers asked to the judge that I stop watching the hearing until I had given evidence. That's why I was basically prevented from following 2 weeks of hearing because
Right.
the U.S. Counsel requested so. I mean, I think it's a standard procedure, because if you are a witness, you are not supposed to watch other witnesses when cross-examined, but
Okay.
you are allowed to follow and to watch the hearing immediately after you gave evidence, basically. So it was nothing, from this point of view, it was nothing special. It's a standard procedure.
But you're testifying also in the Spanish case, right, which is ongoing. So
Yeah,
could you tell
unfortunately,
us more
there
about that?
sure, I'm a victim, and at the same time, I'm a witness. So you have to realize that basically, inside the when Julian entered the embassy, immediately after he entered the embassy and took refuge in the embassy, in the Ecuadorian embassy, I visited him. It was basically November 2012. He had obtained asylum in August 2012, and I visited him in November 2012. And since then, I visited him many times, so I knew the embassy, I knew the security guards, and I could realize that basically there was we were under surveillance, but because there were cameras, but I could never have realized that these security guards were basically basically become completely hostile and were spying on
Right.
all of us. For sure, they spied and they basically got my conversation. I have a video file where my conversation with Julian was not just filmed, but also recorded. And they basically accessed my personal belongings. They took pictures and they unscrewed my phones. And it was a very serious violation of my, we never had access the embassy. I introduced myself as a journalist. They knew I was a journalist. They knew they were unscrewing the phone of a journalist. So I was really upset when I was provided these photographs of
Yeah.
these spying activities and videos and so on. I was really upset, really.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have to realize that this happened, basically, this happened December 2017 when they unscrew my phones. And you have to realize that in November 2017, I had discovered that the UK authorities at the Crown Prosecution Service, which is the very same agency in charge of the extradition, the US extradition case, the Crown Prosecution Service had destroyed crucial documents about the case. And to these days, I'm still fighting to discover why they discovered the documents, or why they destroyed the documents, how they destroyed them, and what kind of documents they destroyed. It's something extremely serious that you destroy the documents about a criminal case which is still ongoing, is high profile and very controversial. I never heard this something extremely serious. And
Yeah.
the buying activities took place a month after I had discovered this.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about the freedom of information requests in a second, because that's such a huge topic. But I just wanted to ask you about UC Global, just what your thoughts were on the two witness statements that were read into the record. So again, for those who are following the case, they already know that these were anonymized at the request of the Spanish court. What did you make of those statements? Because I was actually anticipating the entire hearing because it went on for 4 weeks. I was waiting for this UC Global stuff to come up, and then it came up on day 17. Did you feel that these were rushed and glossed over?
Well, I'm sure you watch the hearing, you realize that basically the US was trying not to have this kind of evidence discussed in court, and they said that this is not relevant for the US case, which is absolutely, amazing that they argue that these activities are not relevant. I mean, it's unbelievable, especially because among the people who were spied were the lawyers of Julian Assange. So they were basically acquiring legally privileged information by the spying activities. So it's unbelievable that the US counsel argued that this case is not relevant for the extradition case. It's unbelievable. And if you read the documents, the witness statement supporting the indictment of Julian Assange is even more incredible, because the U.S. attorney, Gordon Kronberg, basically writes, well, if these activities will actually be established, whether it was a spying activity on behalf of U.S. intelligence. In that case, we will not use these documents, this legally privileged information. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like if you have a thief stealing money, and when the police come, he says, look, I want to use this money. Don't put me in prison because I want to use the money. You know, it's unbelievable.
It's incredible. Like, they expect us to believe this nonsense. I couldn't, I was like, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. When I read the statement by Gordon Kronberg, I couldn't believe it. He actually writes, provided that this information is correct, provided that these spying activities were done on behalf of US authorities, and provided that among the documents there are the legally privileged documents and the conversation between Julian Assange and his lawyers, we want to use them. So it's incredible, completely incredible.
Yeah, they're real mental gymnastics, which we saw a lot, and it was kind of like when the prosecution would say that, okay, we accept what's written, that this is written in the witness statements, but we don't accept it as being true, which they used a lot. This kind of
yeah, absolutely. But even for me, it was even incredible that they said they argued before the judge that the US is not attacking, is not prosecuting journalism activities. It's only prosecuting the publication of documents exposing sources to risks, which is completely false, because they charge him. If you look at the superseding indictment, if you look at it, basically all other charges, apart from count 15, 16, and 17, all other charges are basically for receiving, obtaining classified information, and for disclosing disclosure, which is all these counts, which means 14 counts, basically are about journalistic activities, because obtain classified information, unauthorized disclose unclassified information. So all these 14 counts are about journalistic activities. So they are lying, absolutely lying.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, this is using 793, Section 793 of the Espionage Act, and this is reserved for spies, not journalists. But of course, we know since the beginning it's a political tool. It's what it is.
It's extremely serious. I mean, if they can get. We can go out with this. They actually have Julian Assange extradited for these activities, it will be the end of journalism. It will be absolutely the end of journalism, because this case criminalizing basically receiving, obtaining unauthorized disclosure of classified information. So, and they don't care why. You don't have public interest defense, which is unbelievable because
Right.
we journalists, you have to realize, I'm not sure whether how people who are following this interview realize that we journalists commit crimes quite often whenever we do investigative work. I had a colleague working in Italy at L'Espresso, and he wanted to verify what was going on inside the Italian detention center in Sicily. So he basically jumped to the sea, waited for for Italian authorities rescuing him, and he finally got access to the detention center, refugee and migrants detention center, claiming he was an Iraqi refugee. And he was telling a lot of lies to the police, of course, because he was doing this work undercover, So he committed a serious crime according to the Italian laws. And he was risking 5 years in prison, which is basically what Julian Assange risked for the alleged Computer Crime Act violations.
Yeah.
So he risked 5 years. But he didn't spend a single day in prison. Why? Because the judge said that the public interest of what my colleague had disclosed, thanks to his undercover investigation, was absolutely more relevant than the crime he had committed. So we absolutely need a public interest defense in our journalistic activities, because we sometimes we definitely commit crimes. Of course, we don't kill people, we don't torture, but sometimes we commit crimes. So we absolutely have to rely on the public interest defense. But the Espionage Act doesn't allow you, so you cannot say, sure, I revealed classified information, but I did so to provide evidence of torture, to provide evidence of extrajudicial killing, to provide evidence of serious war crimes. Julian has no defense. So if he gets extradited and will be tried for Espionage Act violations, he will have no serious defense whatsoever, basically.
Exactly.
Which is devastating. The death of journalism, it will be devastating.
Daniel Ellsberg, he was prosecuted under the Espionage Act, and he said ever since his trial, no one has been allowed to give an explanation or explain their motives as to why they did that. And so, as you said, if Assange is extradited, it really is impossible for him to give any kind of explanation or public interest defense. And what's shocking is that it's not just confined to what would happen in the US. It's happening right now in London, in the UK. And we all know that the extradition treaty is very one-sided. You don't even need to actually establish that a crime was committed. It's just...
Absolutely.
Do you think that the judge has been fair at all, or do you think she's been quite biased?
Well, for me, it was pretty shocking to see that she didn't accept that Julian was out of the box, the glass walled box, which is which was pretty incredible to me, because he's treated like a very dangerous criminal, a violent criminal, when we actually know that Julian has never done anything criminal. So for me, it was pretty shocking to realize that the judge was not willing to allow him out of the box. And, I don't know. To be honest, I really don't know, but I can tell you my experience with the freedom of information litigation.
Yes, please.
My experience with the UK courts is that most of the time they appear very fair, very, they very reasonable. But then when they issue their verdict, they absolutely side with the establishment. You have to realize that when we discovered that, my lawyers and I discovered that the UK Crown Prosecution Service had destroyed these documents, we appealed, we filed complaint and so on, and the UK authorities and the judges never ever asked for an inspection to the Crown Prosecution Service. They never had a look at the case. They said there is nothing wrong, there is no problem, everything was fine, and they never check anything. So they absolutely sided with the UK establishment,
Right.
with you have to realize, even the information commissioner, you have to realize the UK information commissioner, which is an important institution, and he should side with the journalists against the institution. The information commissioner should side with the journalists looking for facts, trying to access to these documents, trying to get the documents released. You have to realize that I have been litigating this freedom of information case about Julian Assange WikiLeaks for the last 5 years, and they have never, ever been neutral. I'm not saying siding with me. They are all the time. They basically, each time I go to the tribunal, I appear before a tribunal, I find myself fighting the information commissioner and the Crown Prosecution Service, the information commissioner and the Metropolitan Police. They always side with the UK authorities, which deny me documents. It's unbelievable. It's a scandal, because the information commissioner should side with the journalists trying to get access to the documents and try to shed light on the information. They should side with us in order to have transparency. They are not even neutral. They immediately side with the UK authorities. It's unbelievable. So I'm not optimistic about the UK courts, because I have seen this procedure, and I have seen this all the time from the very beginning of the Julian Assange case. And if you read my FOIA, Freedom of Information documents, you are pretty scared about how they mentioned the Supreme Court, the UK Supreme Court, doing an exceptional treatment about this case, being extremely quick. And so I'm not optimistic about these UK courts, honestly.
Yeah, I can understand why. Just to be clear for the viewers, the documents that you requested under the Freedom of Information Act, this was pertaining to the communications between the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK and their counterparts in the US and Sweden. Is that correct?
So actually, everything started in 2015, Richard, because I realized that no journalist had ever tried to get the documents about this case. So everyone was speaking about the Swedish case, and no one had tried to get the documents, which for me it was madness, because we again, I'm a mathematician, so I like a serious, rigorous procedure. So when I realized that I asked basically information about the Swedish case, no journalist was able to provide me rigorous information, and there was a lot of confusion, and one was mentioning charges, another was mentioning there were no charges, so it was a complete mess. So I told myself, I have to access the documents, because if I get access to the documents, I can get some factual information, which we journalists are supposed to gather to get this factual information. So the first thing was to access the communications by the Swedish prosecutors, because at that time there was no extradition from the US. So I was trying to get these communications by the Swedish prosecutors. Why I was trying to get this communication? Because basically in 2015, I realized that Julian had spent 5 years under investigation, and the case was not making any progress. It was paralyzed. There was a complete paralysis, both from a judicial point of view and from a diplomatic point of view, because it was inside the embassy. So I was talking with an an Italian prosecutor, a prominent prosecutor, and he asked me, why this case doesn't make any progress. And they said it doesn't make any progress because the Swedish prosecutor don't want to go to London to question him and to decide, in order to decide whether to charge him or whether to drop the case. And so he told me, well, this is highly unusual. You should discover why they don't want to go there. So I immediately filed a freedom of information request to the Swedish prosecutors, and I was lucky. They released me a few documents, but very crucial documents. Basically, they released me documents providing evidence that it was the UK authorities telling them, don't come here to question him only after extraditing him.
Wow.
And that was amazing, because you know why they were asking them, they were providing this kind of instruction. I mean, they had realized that there was this paralysis. So it was in the interest of everyone in this case to have some progress. So they should, at a certain point, the UK authorities should have told the Swedish prosecutor, come here and question him. And the UK authorities were also telling to the Swedish prosecutors, don't drop the case. When in 2013, the Swedish prosecutors wanted to drop the case, were considering to drop the case. So it was highly suspicious that basically the UK authorities were providing this instruction. I started requesting the full communication by Sweden, the full communication of the case by the UK authorities, the full communication by the US authorities, and the full communication by the Australian authorities. And 5 years later, I'm still fighting. And now it came out that the UK authorities want to deny me permission to litigate the case. For the first time in the history of since the UK established Freedom of Information Act, never before.
This is incredible.
Unbelievable. It's incredible. I have freedom of information cases all around the world, I suppose, as many journalists, and I have never had this experience. It's unbelievable. And I can tell you that this goes well beyond Julian Assange, because if they can say foreign journalists cannot apply for freedom of information requests, cannot submit freedom of information requests, cannot litigate freedom of information request cases in our UK tribunals, it will be the end of the freedom of information, because I'm sure you realize that in these days there is no journalistic investigation which is not international, which require freedom of information all around the world. So it will be devastating.
It's quite odd as well, the paradox which it places journalists in, because I mean, it's blatant covering up and censorship. So they're essentially saying that anyone who's outside of the UK cannot apply for a Freedom of Information Act request. And I'm wondering if that even includes me, because I'm a British citizen, but I'm not in the UK. Does that mean I'm also not allowed to know what my government is doing? It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Even if you are a UK citizen and are in Spain or in Greece, you have this problem. So it's crazy, completely crazy. And you have to realize that this Freedom of Information Act request is not specifically about Julian Assange, but it is about three former and current WikiLeaks journalists, Sarah Harrison, Christine Ravson, who is the current WikiLeaks editor, and Joseph Farrell. And the reason why I focus this, I have basically two Freedom of Information litigation, one about Julian Assange and another one about these three journalists. Why these three journalists? Because back in 2015, we discovered that the US authorities had acquired all their communications secretly from Google. And that's why I'm requesting all their documents. Initially, I requested the documents to the Metropolitan Police. Why the Metropolitan Police? Because I suppose the Metropolitan Police is the interface of the US authorities, which was correct, because the Metropolitan Police was the interface of the US authorities. So the Metropolitan Police, which is known as Scotland Yard, denied me the documents. I appealed rejection of my Freedom of Information Act, and I won. My lawyer and I won before the court, before the London Tribunal, and the judge ordered the Metropolitan Police to confirm or deny whether they had correspondence with the U.S. authorities. The Metropolitan Police confirmed that they had correspondence with the U.S. authorities, and when we said, please provide us the correspondence, they said, no, we won't provide you because this is national security. We never heard of a single case where national security is applied to journalists. So we know that this is the first time they apply national security to journalists. So we appealed again when they said this is national security case. We appealed again, and they came out saying you are not allowed to apply because you are not a UK national. And now we are appealing because
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. If you realize that I have spent 5 years when the Washington Post in just 3 years obtained the Afghan papers, this provides you a measure of the secrecy around this case. I mean, 5 years litigation, 7 lawyers, 20,000 euros in legal fees, and I'm still fighting. And now they want to get rid of me, you know?
This is ludicrous. This is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, they're essentially playing every a card they can and just making up new rules now. They're making up new rules just as they go along. This is really disgusting. And, you know, it once again, I think, lifts the veil and exposes how these countries, the UK, the US, they're really just playing empire here. They're not interested in open justice. They're not interested in actual democracy and journalistic freedoms. It's really harrowing. And I really commend you, and I really thank you for all this effort that you've gone through for so many years. And as you mentioned, as tireless litigation, you know, it's quite an effort. And you said yourself, you were the only one doing this, or even thought of doing this. If you weren't, who would? You know, so I really thank you for that.
And if you realize that if they get rid of foreign journalists doing this freedom of information work, no one will do it because so far no one did it. So an Italian journalist did it, and now they say, no, you cannot because you are not a UK national, which is
that's absurd.
Absurd.
I bet if for example, you had a British journalist in Britain doing it, they would still come up with a new rule. They will always find something else. So it's really obscene.
Absolutely. I agree. And it was unbelievable that I had to, while appealing, I had to provide the reason why I was I had connection with the UK. So I had to provide them that I was a former Imperial College student. I had I had done freelance work for a UK publication, and my newspaper is available in UK. So it's unbelievable things which basically will destroy the access to freedom of information request.
Yeah.
You know?
I was wondering what you thought of this Lady Arbuthnot being promoted to the High Court. I don't know if you saw this. This happened yesterday, or before yesterday. What do you make of that? Because she's overseeing Judge Baretzer, who's in charge of the extradition hearing.
Well, I'm not sure. I read so far that he will be assigned to the family section of the High Court. So I hope she won't intervene on this case. What upset me is that this Judge Arbuthnot basically is the very same who said that there was no problem at all that Julian Assange remained in the embassy with not even an hour outdoor for 7 years. I don't think there is any sensible person who can argue that basically it's normal that you spent 7 years confined in a building, in a room with no proper, with not an hour outdoor. No serious medical treatment, no proper medical treatment, no sunlight, no fresh air. I don't think there is any sensible person who can argue anything like that. And she basically ruled that there was nothing wrong. There was no problem. For me, it was horrific to hear that. You have to realize that in my country, we give an hour of door to people who are like the mafia bosses who did horrific things, and we provide an hour of door. I mean, even to the people who are under the infamous 41 bis, which is a special regime we have for very dangerous mafia people, and we give them an hour of door, you know?
Right.
So it's, for me, it was shocking to hear this judge saying I cannot see anything problematic about 7 years in a building with no fresh air and nothing. This is give you a measure of how they lost their way. I mean, I believe they lost their way. I mean, they absolutely, I mean, how can you ask a regime to treat journalists in a human way when you do this kind of things? And this is why I basically filed my Freedom of Information Act. I couldn't believe that a human being, a journalist who revealed war crime, spent 7 years inside an embassy, and no journalist tried to understand what is going on, and no journalist tried to acquire the documents. I really couldn't believe it. And when I realized this, I told myself, I don't want to be part of this. I want to be better of these people.
We have a conversation ongoing where we're comparing how a journalist is going to be treated, and comparing him to how terrorists are treated, and the worst of the worst, and he's going to be placed along with them. It's obscene.
I believe that, I mean, we were not there in crucial times, like when the women obtained the right to vote. We were not there when pacifists were allowed to object war. We were not there in many crucial times, but we are here now when a journalist who revealed war crime will be put in prison for life. So we absolutely have to win this case, because it will change the history of journalism. So we absolutely have to win this case, because unless we win, it will be a complete disaster. I mean, we cannot allow the state to put in prison a journalist who revealed war crimes. Absolutely. So we have to fight to have this change, because if we don't fight and if we don't get it right, the consequences are huge, you know, devastating. I don't want to live in a country in a world where you have to go to Russia, to escape to Russia to reveal war crimes, or you have to spend your life in prison, or you have to go through what Chelsea Manning did. I mean, she spent 8 years in prison. Yeah. She tried to commit suicide 3 times. I cannot accept such a high price. It's horrible. So this is not what democracies should do. I absolutely want to fight for it, you know.
You worked with Snowden, if I recall correctly, on the Snowden files. And I want to ask you what you think of people who say that, Edward Snowden, he should go to the United States to face justice, when Julian Assange was in the West, in London, and we can see what kind of quote unquote justice he's getting. I mean, what do you make of this?
Sure. So first of all, I worked with Glenn Greenwald on the Snowden files, and then of course I had the interviews with Edward Snowden, so I know the case rather well. I believe that those people telling that Snowden should go to the US either don't know what they are saying, or maybe they have no idea about the case, because if it goes back, he had been charged under the Espionage Act, and he will be put in prison in that unique hell that are the maximum security prison in the US. Yeah. And he will allow no public interest defense, so he won't be allowed to say, sure, I revealed classified information, but I did so because something extremely wrong was going on, as mass surveillance. So he will be just put in prison for life in a supermax, and that's all. So those people arguing he should face the music, they are the idiots, or they are maybe they are absolutely nonsense people because they don't know what they are talking about, or maybe they like this word. They like this word where a person who expose extremely serious crimes like mass surveillance are put in prison. I mean, we know that there are many people who side with the NSA, with the CIA when these agencies commit these serious crimes. So we know that these people are powerful, and they enjoy protection at all sorts of level, even in the media, of course, because otherwise they would be crushed, So
Right.
they enjoy even media protection, and that's why, for example, when there were public debate about whether to pardon Snowden, the Washington Post, which hugely benefited from the publication because they got a Pulitzer Prize, they publish an editorial say he should not get pardoned. I mean, this gives you a measure of how these people got protected by the media. It's not just
It's
about
unreal.
that these. I mean, these people commit crimes, but
Yeah.
the reason why they never pay for their crimes, they never go in prison, they never ever. They are still there with in their positions, prominent positions, with their careers, salaries, and with their support by the media. The reason why is because these media basically are in bed with them.
Yeah.
That's why the Washington Post published this editorial, which was a complete scandal for
It
me.
really is.
An absolute scandal. You cannot accept that you got a huge advantage, you got a huge benefit by publishing these documents. You win a Pulitzer Prize, so you have the duty to protect your source, and you run an editorial saying he should not be pardoned. I lost any respect for these
Yeah.
media. I lost any respect. Of course, I respect single journalists when they are respectable, but I lost any respect for these kind of things. And I think it's a very serious scandal that these criminals get this protection, by the media.
Are you feeling optimistic about the outcome of the Assange hearing in January?
I'm not optimistic. I don't expect the judge will rule in his favor, honestly. I don't think he has many chances in the UK tribunal. I'm saying this because I have seen what happened with the Swedish case,
Right.
which could have been resolved in a matter of months. I mean, there was no need for extradition to Sweden, and they could have questioned him in London whenever they wanted.
Yeah.
He immediately asked for this option. His lawyers did, Ecuador did, and and I have seen the unique hell he went through for the Swedish case, where there were no charges, and he has spent 10 years under continuous investigation with no charges and no dropping the case. No, the Swedish prosecutor didn't drop the case, didn't charge him. So I'm not optimistic about the UK courts, and I hope he will have a chance at the European Court of Human Rights. But my concern is that his health is collapsing. And my concern is that with this COVID crisis, he might have very serious health problems. In addition to the fact that his health is collapsing, he's exceptionally strong, Julian. I mean, I remember the last time I visited him in the embassy. It was basically November 2018. And I left the embassy and I was upset because I realized how his health was collapsing. And I sent an email to my editor saying, look, I'm really upset. I left the embassy completely shocked because of how his health is collapsing. And I really want to alert the public about this. And this is why I wrote an article about his conditions. And I told to my editors, you have to realize that I still believe it's amazing how he can resist, psychologically speaking, because I would have gone mad in 7 months, not in 7 years inside the embassy. But now he has spent 10 years confined in the embassy under house arrest and now in a high security prison. So his health is really going badly, and I'm really concerned that he cannot resist until the European Court of Human Rights. Because, I mean, what they are doing basically is crashing him.
Yeah.
This is what they have done from the very beginning. Even with the Swedish case, it was, it was about breaking him down. That's why we had this quagmire.
Right.
The whole purpose was, it was basically to break him down, And now I'm very concerned that he might miss this. And I'm also very concerned about COVID because, prison are not Soho House. You don't have proper, if you read the latest report, Belmarsh report, you realize that in Belmarsh there are drugs, there is violence, so there is not a good health care. So COVID is a very serious problem. He might get infected. He might get attacked. We don't know what. That prisons are very bad places to be in.
It's astonishing, speaking of his resilience, how the prosecution tried to use that against him and say that, he's not at, his health is not in great risk because he's shown himself to be very resilient. Like, using that against him, it was just unbelievable to hear that in court.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean, I think it's a shame that a human being has been treated this way. I was really upset all the time whenever I was leaving the embassy. I was really upset. And the last time, in November 2018, I was completely upset. And I remember I wrote this email to my editor saying, I really cannot accept that a human being get treated this way in a civil society, in a democracy. I really cannot accept this. I mean, how do you expect that regime treat people if they see how we treat them,
Yeah, exactly.
And you realize, look at the UN. Look at the UN working group on arbitrary detention. Look at the UN rapporteur on torture. Imagine if the other countries in EU had done this kind of things. Imagine how there would be public outrage. We don't see anything like that. No, nothing like that.
It's a real double standard.
It's a double standard. And it's so scary. It is also scary. Realize that you have the UN working group on arbitrary detention saying, look, he's under arbitrary detention, you should release him and compensate it, and he get completely ignored. And you have the UN special rapporteur saying, look, he's getting psychologically tortured, and nothing happened. It's really scary. One wonder what is necessary before our societies wake up and do something about this,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stefania, just before I let you go, where could people maybe find more of your work and follow what you're doing with the Freedom of Information Act requests?
Well, whenever I can, I translate my articles in English in order to make them accessible even for English people, speaking people. But most of the time, I try to communicate over Twitter whenever I can. And of course, I hope I will be able to write a book based on the documentation I have. And it will take some time because I'm still litigating my freedom of information case. But I hope I will be able to write about this case in order to reconstruct the whole case factually. And in addition, I think a good option is the OR book, OR book, in defense of Julian Assange, where all people who have worked on the case and media partners and friends or other journalists and human rights expert wrote a chapter on the case. So I think that's also is a good book for readers to read.
I'm going to put all of your contacts, of course, your Twitter, everything on the screen so people can follow your wonderful work. Thank you again for your compassion, your empathy, and all of your important work when it comes to reporting on the case and what you did with WikiLeaks and everything. I'm really grateful that you came on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
I'm very grateful to you for this excellent question, Richard, and thank you so much.
Of course. Anytime. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.